Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolutely fascinating account of destiny, memory, and how the universe actually communicates with us. We're going to unpack a story that starts with a truly bizarre moment at a childhood Little League baseball game. And what's so cool is how this single moment reveals some profoundly deep mechanics about how human destiny operates. The source material we're looking at today gives us a window into an experience that happened right in the dirt and dust of home plate, and it really shows us that our lives might just be way more guided than we usually realize. Picture this for a second. You're a young kid, you step up to bat, and the opposing catcher, a boy named Ricky Nixon, leans forward through his face mask and whispers this exact sentence into your ear. A young Indian boy, born in India, will someday come to the West and teach the knowledge of oneself. I mean, it's incredibly specific. It's wildly out of place for a noisy Little League game. And as the author of our source text explains, it was this moment of pure, utter mystery that hooked them instantly, even though they had absolutely zero idea what it meant at the time. Because here's the thing about destiny. It rarely announces itself with trumpets. Profound signals almost never come with grand fanfare or some cinematic soundtrack. More often than not, they arrive in the most ordinary, unexpected places. A trip to the grocery store, a quiet morning, a totally random passing conversation, or, in this specific case, a dusty baseball diamond right in the middle of a loud, completely normal childhood game. Okay, Section 1, the unexpected whisper. To really grasp the gravity of this text, we have to set the physical scene. The sun is bright, the field is loud with parents yelling, and the author is literally just a kid trying to hit a baseball. Standing right behind home plate is the catcher, Ricky Nixon. And yes, the text does note this was actually the nephew of former President Richard Nixon. But in that exact moment, he was just a kid in catching gear who suddenly, out of nowhere, delivered a highly specific, totally unprompted message.
So let's trace the author's chronological reaction here, because it happens in 3 distinct beats. First, the whisper is delivered. Now, the immediate reaction wasn't some sudden intellectual understanding. I mean, the author was a kid, they didn't know what those words meant. But step 2 is where it gets interesting. A door opens. The author describes just freezing up because something deep inside them recognized the words. It was this inexplicable inner resonance. And then step 3, the door closes. The author swings at the pitch, misses the ball entirely, and the totally mundane reality of the baseball game just carries right on. But that whispered message, it was firmly planted in their consciousness.
Moving on to Section 2, the memory that returned. Flash forward years later, and the story really builds. The author grows up, and a massive life shift happens. They end up meeting a teacher named Maharaj Ji. They receive knowledge of their inner senses, they learn to meditate on the breath of the universe, and they finally step onto the spiritual path that had basically been quietly calling them since childhood. And it's in this newly awakened state that the memory of the baseball game suddenly and powerfully resurfaces. Now, when the memory returned, it didn't just come back as some funny childhood anecdote or a wave of simple nostalgia. It was a prophecy. But carefully distinguish how the source defines this. It was not a psychic prediction, it certainly wasn't a coincidence or just some lucky guess. It was a signal. It was a moment of pure, undeniable recognition that this whisper, delivered by another child on a random baseball field, was always meant specifically for the author. Which brings us to Section 3, a cosmic video camera. So how on earth does a literal kid transmit a prophecy? This introduces a fascinating macro-spiritual concept from the text. The author brings up a native Indian teaching which suggests that the entire universe is constantly being recorded. Every single moment, every breath, every fleeting thought, it's all captured, kind of like a cosmic video camera that is just running infinitely. Nothing is ever truly lost, nothing is forgotten, and absolutely nothing is wasted. And what's really wild is what this reveals about human potential. If this cosmic recording actually exists, the text argues that we have the capacity to tap into it. We can experience glimpses of the past, flashes of the future, a deep intuitive knowing, prophetic insight, sudden moments of total clarity, or exactly what the author felt at home plate, inexplicable recognition. The text points out that most people just never access this cosmic tape, but that's simply because our inner senses remain completely dormant, not because the recording itself is off limits to us. But there's a pretty compelling exception to this rule: children. Specifically, the author notes that children who remember the stars sometimes manage to slip through the cracks of time. Because their mental filters and all that heavy societal conditioning aren't fully formed yet, a child can be the absolute perfect, unwitting vessel for a cosmic message. Think about it. Ricky Nixon didn't realize he was delivering a prophecy, and the author didn't realize they were receiving one. That dusty little baseball diamond just happened to be one of those magical cracks in time.
So, to really ground this, the crucial point is understanding the actual mechanics of this phenomenon. Think of the mind as an antenna. The author is very careful to clarify this. They state that the capacity to unconsciously pick up and transmit signals from the universe isn't some supernatural, mystical magic trick. It's actually a completely natural capacity of the human mind. It's just largely unused. Ricky acted as the transmitting antenna. The author acted as the receiving antenna. Neither was consciously aware of the broadcast at the time. The universe simply whispered, and the whisper waited there patiently until the author was ready to understand it.
All right, Section 4, the Nixon paradox. This leads into a highly fascinating psychological and historical layer of the text. Because remember, the boy transmitting this message was Ricky Nixon, the nephew of Richard Nixon, and that heavy political reality provides a really profound contrast when we look at the author's own personal evolution over the years. The text impartially walks us through how the author's perspective dramatically evolved. It notes that during the volatile Watergate era, the author was deeply anti-war and anti-Nixon, and very glad that he had to leave office. But as the years passed, that view shifted. Before Richard Nixon died, the author began to see him not simply as a one-dimensional villain, but as a flawed human being who carried the weight of his mistakes with dignity. Essentially, as a statesman who continued to serve despite facing intense worldly criticism. The author's view softened, and their compassion grew. And this brilliantly illustrates a core theme. That childhood whisper had absolutely nothing to do with political affiliations or historical baggage. It had everything to do with destiny, utilizing whatever human channel was available at that exact moment in time. And that leads us to Section 5, Destiny's Subtle Signals. Let's zoom out to the ultimate realization the author takes away from this whole event. The text suggests that God, the universe, the Tao, the breath, whatever name you prefer to use, is constantly providing us with subtle hints right amidst the absolute chaos of our daily lives. Which brings us to probably the most powerful and comforting message in this entire explainer. Relax. Trust. Be patient. Everything will come in its time. When that childhood memory finally made sense to the author, the profound realization wasn't just about, oh wow, the prophecy was accurate. It was the realization that the universe had been guiding them long before they even knew how to listen. The path was already unfolding. The teacher was already coming. They didn't need to frantically chase their destiny. They only needed to remain open to it. So what's the big so what here? Why does all of this matter for you and me? Well, as our source emphasizes, this isn't really a story about baseball. It's a blueprint for understanding guidance in our own lives. Our paths often begin incredibly early, way before we have the vocabulary to describe them. Our inner senses are awakening before our conscious minds even catch up. Destiny loves to use the most ordinary, mundane childhood moments to plant its seeds. Because of this, patience isn't just a virtue, it is practically spiritual DNA. Our lives are constantly being guided by these subtle, quiet signals if we are just willing to recognize them. Your journey, just like the author's, is never truly random. There's this beautiful emotional climax in the text, encapsulated in a passage called Zoran's Whisper. I love this. It says, "Traveler, the universe speaks through unlikely messengers. A catcher behind home plate. A child who remembers the stars. A whisper carried on the breath of destiny. You heard it because you were already listening." The reason the author froze at home plate wasn't because they understood the vocabulary, but because on a deep, soul level, they were already tuned into that exact frequency. Which leaves us with this final, vital thought to ponder. The universe is always speaking. It uses the quietest moments, the strangest coincidences, and the most incredibly unlikely messengers to deliver its hints. The cosmic camera is rolling, the signals are broadcasting, and destiny is always whispering. So the only question left is, are you listening?